Good evening. Welcome to Employment Law Today here on Talk Radio NYC. I'm your host, Eric Sauver from the law offices of Eric M. Sauver. I'm an employment law and business law attorney, and I'm very happy tonight to have with me a special guest, a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Bruce Hurwitz. Bruce, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Eric. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Before we introduce Bruce and get into a bit of an interesting conversation, I thought I'd just let people know a little bit about employment law today, the main goals of the show and what I'm doing each week with the show. And so the first goal of employment law today is to basically provide information and useful laws, updates, and data around all the different regulations and statutes and laws that have to do with employment law for business owners and companies, particularly as it relates to hiring and firing in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are additional laws that have come out and different regulations, and so part of the show is educational and informative. And then the second goal of the show is to motivate and inspire business owners during this time. Lots of people, if you run a business, whether you're a restaurant or a technology company, there's a lot of anxiety in the air and there's a lot of concern and even confusion about what to do. And so I have guests each week who speak about issues related to employment law. And then I have also some featured guests who talk about issues that are very, very relevant now during the pandemic, such as cybersecurity and setting up your workers virtually, or video marketing, or financial considerations to keep in mind during the pandemic. So that's just a little bit of a flavor of the show. And our topic tonight has to do with COVID-19 and recruiting and hiring in the time of the pandemic. And before I introduce Bruce as my guest, I thought I'd just give a little flavor of our topic tonight that Bruce and I will be discussing. As we all know, recruiting talented candidates and people for hire, it can be quite a stressful or arduous process, even in the best of times. I think that many companies can attest to that. And on the candidate side, certainly employees who are searching for work, I think very few would describe it as a walk in the park. So that's even pre-COVID-19. And when you add on top of that, some of the stressors and the changes that have come about in light of the pandemic, there are all sorts of other factors to keep in mind. So I'm going to be speaking with Bruce Hurwitz today to talk about how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted recruiting, what changes Bruce has seen in the industry, how to go about the hiring process in a different light, and we'll have some tips for those nervous employees looking for positions. So that's a little bit of a teaser for our topic. And with that, I would love to introduce Bruce. I just have a little bit of a statement to read that Bruce had sent over to me. So Dr. Bruce Hurwitz is an executive recruiter. He's also a career counselor and a 5-star rated professional speechwriter. He has a company called Hurwitz Strategic Staffing, the mission of which is to promote the hiring of veterans. Bruce is an internationally recognized expert in his field. In addition to national and local television appearances, Bruce has been cited in over 700 articles, appearing in more than 500 publications across the United States and in some 30 countries. His LinkedIn articles have been read over 410,000 times. Did I get that number correct, Bruce?
That's correct.
I thought I may have added a 0 there.
No.
Okay. And then lastly, I want to include the fact that Bruce is also Amazon's #1 best-selling author of the book, The 21st Century Job Search. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome you once again, Bruce. Welcome to the show.
And the one thing I will add is that I am not an attorney, so no one should consider anything that I say as legal advice.
And that's part of my disclaimer, usually at the end of the show, but now we can save a little bit of time right there. Exactly.
Well, for me, not for you.
Right. That's true. Yes. And so everyone should keep that in mind.
You can still get in trouble.
Exactly. So I'll still have that disclaimer as well. But it's good that Bruce actually has that clarification. Yeah, Bruce is here to provide his insights, his observations, his experience, and his opinions. So Bruce, if I may launch into this with just if you can tell us a bit about yourself in terms of how long have you been in recruiting and career counseling and speech writing?
Well, my background was nonprofit. I went to a recruiter who specialized in the nonprofit sector,
Mhm.
and he offered me a job as a recruiter. So I went from the nonprofit to the for-profit, trying to help nonprofits.
Hmm.
That was in 2003. In 2009, I decided to go out on my own. And as you said, I started a company, the mission being to promote the hiring of veterans. In addition, because of the press coverage that I had received, people were calling me asking for advice. So I added on career counseling. Then about 3 years ago, I literally fell ill. And for a month, I couldn't work, lost all my clients, didn't blame them. I was in no condition I could barely help myself, let alone help anyone else.
Sure.
But then I needed a job. I needed to do something. And someone told me about the website Fiverr.
Mhm.
And I went to Fiverr, I signed up, and all of a sudden I started getting scores of people interested in having me write speeches for them. So that's how the speech writing came about. But what's nice about it is that the entire process makes me more empathetic to my clients, to the career counseling clients,
Mhm.
and to my candidates, because I've gone from academia to nonprofit to for-profit to being an entrepreneur. And I know what it's like to be in trouble, to not have a job.
Right.
And a lot of career counselors don't have that. They can't empathize. They can sympathize, but they can't empathize, because if you haven't been through it, you don't know. And I had never been unemployed before.
Hmm.
I'd always had a job. The one thing, though, about recruiting that I've always hated
Mhm.
is that recruiters do not stay in touch with candidates once they don't need them anymore.
Right.
They're a candidate, and then they get rejected, and then they don't bother calling them up and following through. So I always follow through with my candidates. It's what differentiates me from everybody else. And I let them know that they're rejected. And I've done it hundreds of times. I was telling this to a client just today.
Mhm.
It's worth taking a couple minutes, make the phone calls, and you know what? Literally one time in 17 years, someone was rude to me.
Right.
People usually say, I appreciate the phone call. Now
Sure.
they know. And that's it.
So I hear the answer to the other question I was going to ask you about the differentiating of yourself, and I hear your own personal experience. Glad to hear you were on the mend, or you
Oh,
recovered from
yeah.
that illness, by the way. But
Yeah.
it's interesting how that definitely, I think, our life experiences can shape our interactions with our clients, and often will give us that level of empathy to go the extra mile. I know certainly I can speak from my experience very early on with some law firms, and there was one particular firm that just wasn't a good fit, and it let me see the situation that employees often find themselves in. And so when I went out on my own in 2001, I had the wealth of experience from that. And so when I had employee side clients explaining what they were going through, I could have that extra, as you mentioned, empathy. And I think that's a really important thing to have. I think that's an important trait. And it's good to know that you follow up with your clients. I know I tend to do the same. I like to let people know, even if they're a potential client and say it's not a good fit, I will go the extra mile. So good to hear that you're in that category.
It's funny, you misspoke. These aren't my clients. These are my candidates.
Right. For you, the
Okay. I
candidates, for
always
me, the
follow
clients.
up with the clients, let them know what's going on, but I also follow up with the candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, I got a client through a candidate who I had rejected, because I was the only recruiter who had called him to say, I'm sorry, Eric, they've decided to go with somebody else. You're a great guy. Somebody's got to win. Somebody's got to lose. Next time it'll be you. And he remembered that. His boss asked him if he knew a recruiter. He sent him to me.
Right. And for you as candidates that you're referring to, and I was referring in my situation more to the extra mile of clients, but it's definitely a point I think worth making in terms of how you and your company distinguish yourself from other recruiters out there. You have that extra personal layer, plus your experience, which I think we can get to as we go through some other topics and questions. But that's really good to know, including the Fiverr lead into your speech writing career. I wasn't sure I was aware of that. I knew you were a speechwriter, but never knew how that came about. It's funny how those life situations can happen. And something I hope will inspire some listeners out there today. If, let's say, they have a restaurant, for example, and they opened up in January, in February, and let's say COVID-19 forced them to close, my hope is that they'll learn from that experience and maybe even find a silver lining. And if I can have guests on my show that can help businesses get to that silver lining, then that's a service I'd be happy to play a part in, small role that it might be. So, if I may, Bruce, just talk about maybe some hiring trends and tips for employers seeking candidates during the pandemic, just to kind of get into that topic for a moment. I was wondering, I know we've all read some, well, I don't know if we have, but I've read some gloomy job reports out there and some comments about looming recession getting worse or the shrinking workforce. We hear about unemployment numbers. And so I wondered if you can perhaps shed some light for us. Have there been any surprise upticks in recruiting in any industries that you're aware of? Any, for example, sections that are actually hiring more these days that you've been getting calls for on the recruiting side?
Yes, IT,
IT.
because of what we're doing right now.
Right.
I mean, it's as simple as that. You had mentioned it, I'll mention it a couple of times, cybersecurity.
Mm.
I have to give this a little bit of a legal context. Again, not a lawyer.
Right.
I have something that I call the 3 prenups.
Mm-hmm.
You have, and I did a little Google search.
Mm-hmm.
The first prenup is the marital or engagement prenup. I did a Google search of, how did I word it? What are the reasons for not signing a prenuptial agreement? I got 10,900,000 hits, and virtually all by divorce attorneys. Wonder why.
Interesting.
I then did, what are the reasons to not sign a business partnership agreement? And I got 1,470,000,000 hits. And obviously I didn't look at all of them, but I couldn't find one person who had written one single article on why you wouldn't sign a business partnership agreement. And then, and here you come in, I did a search for why wouldn't you have an employee handbook? 1,670,000,000 responses and nothing. The only one that said reasons why and listed them was being sarcastic.
I would agree with you on that wholeheartedly. I'm a big fan of employee handbooks. I draft them and write them regularly for my companies and clients. And we were actually right up upon our first commercial break. But I think this is a great start to our show. I look forward to some future questions. So if everyone can stick around, we'll be right back on Employment Law Today. I'm Eric Sauver. My guest, Dr. Bruce Hurwitz, Hurwitz Strategic Staffing, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Do you love or are you intrigued about New York City and its neighborhoods? I'm Jeff Goodman, host of Rediscovering New York, a weekly show that showcases New York's history and its extraordinary neighborhoods. Every Tuesday live at 7 p.m., we focus on a particular neighborhood and explore its history, its vibe, its feel, and its energy. Tune in live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Hey, all you listeners, looking to boost your business? Why not advertise on Talk Radio NYC with very reasonable rates? Interested? Simply send us a message on our website, talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Graham Dobbin. Join me every Thursday evening for the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. We speak to people from business, sport, military and politics, all around what makes a great leader. The personal experiences of what's worked and maybe more importantly, what hasn't worked. So that's 7 o'clock every Thursday evening, the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. Listen to real stories of real leaders.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today here on Talk Radio NYC. I'm Eric Sauver from the Law Office of Eric M. Sauver, Employment Law, Business Law Attorney, here with my colleague, Dr. Bruce Hurwitz. Bruce, good to be back.
Yeah.
And I wanted to jump into this topic. You mentioned surprise uptick, or maybe not such a surprise, in the tech field. And so you're recruiting and you're speaking with companies. And what I'm wondering is, are there any new topics or any new advice or guidance that you're giving to companies from a recruiting perspective as they're going about the candidate search or the interview process?
Actually, because of COVID and the fact that all interviews are now done virtually, video, exactly what we're doing now.
Yes.
The process is a lot quicker. You don't have to get in the car and drive somewhere, or go on the bus. What used to take 3 hours for a 1 hour interview now takes 1 hour because you walk from one room to another room. So you have to work quickly because otherwise you're going to lose the candidates. A candidate can now theoretically do 5 interviews in a day. It's not going to happen, but it could happen. And by the time you're having your meeting and showing the video to everybody and their brother, candidate's already gotten a job. So you have to move quickly. Doesn't mean carelessly, it means quickly.
Right. Quickly, efficiently. So
you still have to check references, you have to do your due diligence, but you can't play games.
Right. I suppose that's an interesting answer that I didn't actually think about, but you're right that there are candidates now who can schedule 5 interviews in as much as a 6-hour period. If they take a break between, maybe they get a snack or use the restroom and they're back at their computer. Whereas in the past, it was a subway ride to the office to shake hands and so forth, and then the trip back. And so they had to get dressed up and then get dressed down again. And so I think that's an interesting, those little nuances, I think, are something that companies might not recognize because they're used to doing business the old way. So the old way may have been, okay, well, we have this candidate interview on Monday. We're going to take our time and maybe get back to them on Thursday. What I hear you saying is that there's a little bit more of a necessity for, like a need for speed, but not carelessness. Is that?
Yeah, you have to be efficient.
Right.
You have to be efficient. I'm a big believer in reference checking, and yes, I've received bad references. And you have to talk to the person because I can get up and say, Eric was a great employee, or I can say, Eric was a great employee. And now I know that I wanted to be able to tell Eric, I said you were a great employee. The fact that my tone of voice the second time around sent the opposite message that I don't have to tell you.
Right. It's what you pick up in the live conversations that you don't pick up on just somebody's email or message or their resume or written letter recommendation or whatnot. Which also brings me to a question, Bruce, and this is interesting, with the disclaimer in place that Bruce is not an attorney, as he mentioned. What came to mind for me, one of the things I'm fielding a lot these days are questions from my clients who are companies about what they can and cannot ask during the hiring process around COVID-19, around, for example, if somebody has a pre-existing condition, which of course, as we know, is off limits. If they have a disability that might make them more prone to COVID, or if they're in a certain age group. I've had companies come to me and say, I want to make sure that I protect my workers over 60. So can I ask the candidate how old they are? And the answer is no. It can bring in all kinds of age discrimination elements if you don't give them the job. And so but my question to you in that light is, as a recruiter, are there certain perhaps either questions that are even more off the table now, or maybe even some new questions, additional questions that you recommend or that you use in the recruiting process for
I'm
candidates?
going to give you the answer. You were kind enough to come on my podcast, and I'm going to now give you the type of answer that I hate to get.
I know it's coming.
No,
Yep. Mhm.
period.
Right.
There's no difference. Nothing has changed. Now, there are some new insights. For example, everyone is now a receptionist.
Mhm.
You pick up your phone and you say, this is Eric Saver's law office. How can I help you? Or you could, do you say, good morning. Thank you for calling Eric Saver, attorney at law. How may I be of help?
And then I would tell them it's Sarver, and then they would say, oh, sorry about that. No, I'm just joking. I'm kidding. But
I
anyway,
mispronounced your name. I
that's
apologize.
okay. Happens
I
all the time.
apologize.
No worries. Happens all the time. Just joking.
The now you threw me off. I probably did it to you, so we're even.
Fair enough.
When you hear the candidate and how they pick up the phone, because now that's going to be your first interaction. It's not going to be email. And now you're going to be even more sensitive because you're calling up, as you always would, to set up a real interview, but now it's going to be a virtual interview. You're more cognizant of their telephone manner. So, I've called people at 9 o'clock and I know I woke them up. That tells me something. But there's no new question you can't ask because there's no new protected class to the best of my ability, best of my knowledge. So no, there's nothing new in that regard, except there's one question that I now ask for one job, but it deals with the qualifications. And it's not something that goes to disability, it goes to willingness. Are you willing to go out into the field? The position of a field network engineer, emphasis on field.
Right.
Are you willing to go out and meet with clients? Because there are jobs outside of the medical field where you have to be in physical contact with the client or with their equipment.
Sure.
And if you don't want to go, then, I'm sorry, you can't have the job. You're fully qualified for it, except for the fact you're not willing to go out. It's not discrimination.
Right.
I'm not doing it because you're a fill in the blank.
Right.
I'm rejecting you because you're not willing to do the job.
And I would agree with you on that point 100%. You've got, there's no discrimination in terms of any protected class. It's one of the necessary job performance of the job functions, the duties that's required is to be out in the field. And so if the person, now some people might on the interview say, I can go out into the field some days, not others, and they might ask for a reasonable accommodation request if they have a pre-existing disability. And that can get into a whole other topic around should the employer give an accommodation? And that's more of a legal issue around undue hardship. That's, I think, really more in the employment lawyer's realm. But to your point, I mean, all the questions that you said are pretty much the same. The questions you can't ask are still the ones you can't ask about, right? Someone's age or sexual orientation, or if they, let's say, have any other type of situation like certain health conditions you can't ask about. But what I hear you saying is there are additional, I think what I'm hearing, Bruce, is that you're noticing that there are different cues to look for perhaps now with the pandemic, maybe due to some of our lifestyle changes. So calling somebody, for example, at 9 a.m. and noticing, are they sharp and alert and awake, or are they kind of that groggy, frog in the throat, just woke up voice kind of answering the phone. And it brings me to another interesting point here that normally, I think during a recruiting process, let's say a vetting, from what I've seen talking to colleagues of mine in recruiting, that they often look for, say, certain red flags, and they look for certain positive traits too. They look for like traits in a person. Are they sociable? Are they personable? I'm just wondering, are there any additional traits you look for now or recommend? Like, for example, the ability to be clear and comfortable on video, which may not have been quite as important 2 years ago, but maybe now everything's being done virtually. Like, is that an example, let's say, or are there other new traits that you recommend employers look for in the pandemic perspective?
Mr. Sarver, that is an excellent point. That is true.
Mhm.
But I have something else.
Okay.
Yes, it's important how their on-camera persona,
Mhm.
which won't be valid anymore once things get back to normal, whatever that's going to be.
Right.
But can they set up their computer?
Hmm.
Are they comfortable with the technology?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they panicking? Are they going from their iPhone to their computer and back again and apologizing? I don't know why it's not working.
Mm.
It's a way to see how comfortable or uncomfortable they are with the technology.
Hmm.
But there's something else.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever date it was, March 1st, April 1st, they were laid off.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a long time. And they've done their best to try to find a job. They haven't been successful. None of this is their fault.
Mm-hmm.
But what have they been doing with their time?
Hmm.
Have they been taking a course online? Have they been trying to get some sort of certification? What have they been doing with their time? That's the question I like to ask. And if they say, I've just been applying for jobs, that can be a red light.
Mm-hmm.
Because you want to have an employee who, when they finish the task, isn't going to play games on their cell phone. They're
Right.
going to get up and they're going to be proactive and they're going to go to a colleague and say, how can I help you?
Mm-hmm.
Or they're going to tell the boss, I just finished everything. What's next on the agenda? So if they're home and they're not employed
Mm-hmm.
and they're only looking for a job, they're not looking for a job from 9 to 5. What are they doing to improve themselves? If they're not taking advantage of the time to improve themselves, that's my biggest red flag.
I think that's an excellent point, Bruce. I think, and I think that even those that may be, something you may have looked at in the past of what do people do between jobs, I think that it's especially important now to see in terms of someone's character, in terms of someone's attitude and how they approach life, because certainly people who have been home with the pandemic, there are certainly online, like you mentioned, courses they can take. There's a lot they can do. So I think I hear what you're saying there. It's a question of what they did or what they didn't do can be very telling as to are they the creative type to meet adversity and to know how to say pivot towards a different direction, or so I think if I hear you correctly, it's a matter of the red flag is if it's, well, I've just been sending out resumes every day and you're wondering why they haven't shown maybe a little extra initiative of saying, well, I've been home and I've had this time so I can pursue, let's say, like you said, a degree online, or I can find a different course to take to enhance my skill set. It's an interesting red flag. We've got to take a break in a moment, but I think this topic of red flags is important because I think that I wonder if certain traits might have been a may almost give off like a false red flag reading. And I'll come back to that question, maybe be more specific when we come back from a commercial break. So
Great.
stick around, folks. I'm Eric Sauver from the law office. Eric M. Sauver, employment law, business law attorney. I'm here with executive recruiter, career counselor, a career coach, candidacy author, and speechwriter. Got a little tongue tie there. Dr. Bruce Hurwitz from Strategic Legal Staffing. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Are you interested in having a better relationship with yourself, others, and God? Greetings. I'm your host, Dr. George Andow, for the show A Journey Through into Awareness. On my show, we journey into the awareness that the mind of God is the true seat of our personal consciousness. We join together each Monday at 7 p.m., so tune in on Talk Radio NYC.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a curious person, always asking questions? Do you desire to be in the know? Then join me, Antonia, host of So Now You Know, Thursdays at 5 p.m. at talkradio.nyc. Listen in as I attempt to satisfy that curiosity. I will be talking with amazing, everyday people. Join the fun. So Now You Know on Thursdays at 5 p.m. at talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today here on Talk Radio NYC. I'm your host, Eric Sauver. My guest, Dr. Bruce Hurwitz. And I want to make a quick correction. That's Dr. Bruce Hurwitz from Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. I think I may have misspoke a moment ago in the commercial.
That's all right.
So I just wanted to clear the air there and make sure everyone knows your company, because I think you do a lot of good work, Bruce.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Sure. So it's speaking about this topic of advising and counseling or guiding your companies on the recruiting side. We talked about red flags a little bit, and we talked about type of things to look for. I think what I was wondering about, Bruce, is from a recruiter's perspective, do you see a couple of character traits that might give off almost like a false red flag reading? And I can give maybe two quick examples of what I'm thinking about. Yes, because I'd love to hear your perspective. So, for example, say an employee having a job interview in October 2019 in someone's office in person. And if that person is sitting across the desk from the hiring employer and the candidate's not making much eye contact, they're looking like this, you might think, that's a red flag. Person lacks certain social skills or connectivity, or maybe they're shy or uncomfortable. But let's say now, fast forward to October 2020, and the same candidate on Zoom might be wanting to look the recruiter in the eye, or the hiring employer in the eye, and they're looking at them on the screen, not the camera. And maybe a second example of what I might wonder might perhaps be a false red flag. Maybe I'm mistaken, but maybe there's a different perspective. Might be, for example, let's say there was a Skype or Zoom interview. Again, let's take it back, time machine to October 2019. And it's just done for convenience over Skype or Zoom. I don't know if the person had, two kids in the background arguing or running across the screen or whatnot, you might wonder, that's a red flag. Why didn't they get the kids off to the park or a babysitter? Shouldn't the kids be in school? But now the kids might be home, with Zoom learning, and maybe their school's not open. So maybe it's not as much of a shock that the kids are. So are these examples of maybe false red flag readings in the light of the COVID pandemic, or is there a different perspective here I'm missing?
I'll answer it this way with some real incidents.
Sure.
Pre-COVID, so you're October 2019.
Those are the days.
I'm interviewing a candidate I don't remember what the specific job was, but the most important quality was being detail-oriented.
Mm.
And this was a probably Skype interview. I don't think I used Zoom at the time. Matter of fact, I don't think Zoom existed at the time. We started off normal pleasantries. Everybody knows exactly how the interview began. And then I said, for this position, you must be detail-oriented. Give me an example of a project you worked on which required you to be detail-oriented. And then he started to speak. Then I looked at where he was. He was in his bedroom. Nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
The camera was facing his bed.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
Except for two things. One, he hadn't made the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And two, every picture on the wall was crooked. I don't mean it looked like a Christmas tree. I mean, everything was crooked.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is no way on God's green earth that this guy could have convinced me that he was detail-oriented, because no detail-oriented person could stand having the crooked pictures, whatever, on the wall, and no detail-oriented person doesn't make their bed.
Right.
So it didn't matter what he said, it was what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another time, I had an interview,
Mm-hmm.
and the door opens near the end of the interview, and this little girl climbs on to the bed. This bed was made, and everything on the wall was perfectly straight.
Mm-hmm.
The little girl gets onto the bed, and she's just watching.
Mm-hmm.
And we finished the interview. I asked, as I always do you have any questions? I answered as best I could whatever questions he had.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, I have one final question for you. What is the name of your daughter's dog? And he looked at me and said, my daughter doesn't have a dog.
Mm.
And I said, went like this. So he turned around and he turns back and he's got a huge smile on. He goes, when did she come in? I said, 5 minutes ago, it's not a problem. And then instead of running out of the door, she was 3 years old. Instead of running out of the room, he came over to her father, holding her dog. And he picked her up, introduced us, and then he didn't say another word. And I asked her, what her dog's name was, and probably asked her what she wanted to be when she grows up. And we had a nice conversation without any prompting at all from her father. Interview ended. I submitted him, and I'm known for telling my clients everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and also the cute. And this was cute, but I decided not to include it. I said to myself, it's not professional. It's got nothing to do with anything. Daughter was well behaved. I mean, there's no red flag here. There's no problem.
Sure.
They called me back and they said, Bruce, he's a solid candidate, but he's not a star. I said, well, there was one thing that I didn't tell you. And I told him the story. I said, she was able to have a conversation without any prompting at all from her father, and she's 3 years old. I think that tells you something about him. All right. He got the interview because of his daughter and her stuffed dog. All right. Didn't get the job, but he got the interview. They liked that. They wanted to meet him.
So they didn't hire the daughter; they hired him, or they interviewed him rather. Not the
They
daughter.
didn't hire him. No, they would have hired the daughter, but underage. You lawyers with your child
labor
violations.
Sure. Right.
Now, on the other hand, when I have an interview now, and the cell phone goes off, I mean, what was the first thing we did, or the last thing I did, and I think the first thing you did was to turn off the phone.
Right.
All right. You don't want to have to apologize. If somebody's going to call you, they're going to call you when you're on Zoom interviewing for a job.
Sure.
If you can't control your children, your spouse, that can be a sign that if you can't control the people on your most intimate team, are you able to control the people on your professional team? It can be a red flag. It's not necessarily a red flag. It's also how the person handles it.
Right.
If he gets upset and says, I told them to be quiet, all right, that's a bad sign. And it's happened. On the other hand, somebody else said, I apologize, something might be wrong. Would you mind if I get up and take a look? Something was wrong. There's no problem. If it was a father, first priority, his child, who was hurt. I had no problems with that.
Right.
The employer my client didn't have a problem with it.
Right.
It's exactly what you should have done. So there are, but it also depends on where you're coming from.
Right.
So
what I
you
hear
can say something's bad and I can say it doesn't matter, it's fine.
Right. And it's an interesting point too, because I think there are situations that might come up more frequently now. I mean, any of us who have, let's say, been on a networking or a business call on Zoom may have seen the child, Zoom bomb, the 3-year-old in the background that comes in. But what I hear you saying, if I'm hearing correctly, is that even if these are unusual times and maybe some circumstances might be a bit more unusual, like, kids at home and so forth, that what I hear, perhaps maybe I'm hearing that you might look at how does the person handle a situation. So for example, if they recognize, hey, I've been talking to you, Bruce, for the last 40 minutes, let's say, and they realize, I've been really looking at you on the screen and I'm not at the camera because that's how I'm trained to look people in the eye. You might perhaps take that into account.
That one really doesn't bother me because I'm guilty of it too. I know I'm supposed to be looking a little bit to the right of the light on the top of my computer, but I'm looking at you. It's just natural.
Yeah.
And so if that's the reason you don't want to hire me, God bless. I don't want to work for you.
Right. And I think that's the point I was getting to.
A person, I've been on Zoom networking meetings, and a child came in, and the guy pushes the child out of the way.
Wow.
No, I'm sorry.
Right.
No. That's it. I don't have to do a one-on-one with this guy. I now know everything I want to know about him, and I don't want to have anything to do with him.
Those are, I think, the little things that we look for. What I hear in you is attention to detail in terms of human beings, how they interact, the subtle things, like, for example, the person with the bedroom with the pictures crooked and the bed not made. And I think that's an important trait for anyone in recruiting. It's funny when you said that about the person pushing the child out of the way, it reminded me of before I was married, back in the days of dating, when how would, the woman I'd meet or date treat the restaurant staff. Let's say if the waiter forgot something, did that, and I'm sure it applies to women who date men or whoever dates whomever.
It also applies for candidates who are taken to a restaurant with the boss,
right,
and see how, and that's exactly what they're looking for.
Right, and I think even though maybe there are less now candidates going out to lunch with their recruiters, but there's definitely that. And so I hear that interesting point that there are still, even if the circumstances change, and the red flags, what I hear are more about how people respond to situations around them. What are the subtle cues you look for? It's an interesting point. I think it's something that people out there, maybe let's say a company that's hiring, but maybe they don't perhaps have the resources yet to hire a recruiter. Maybe they'll be growing and they'll be reaching out to you in the future, or maybe they actually will recognize that the cost of hiring a poor fit could be expensive to their business, so it's worth it to hire a recruiter. So I shouldn't really assume that a small company or business wouldn't use your services, but good to know that you're looking out for those things. We have another commercial break. My, how the time flies when we're having fun, doesn't it? When we get back, I'd like to maybe explore a little bit of the candidate side of the equation. Maybe Bruce can talk about some of the advice or guidance he's giving to anxious candidates out there, maybe a message of hope. So stick around, folks. Again, I'm Eric Sauver from the Law Office Eric M. Sauver. I'm here with Dr. Bruce Hurwitz, recruiter, career counselor, and speechwriter. We're here on Talk Radio NYC and Employment Law Today. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law business law attorney and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Take two. Welcome back, folks. I'm Eric Sauver from the Law Office of Eric M. Sauver, also host of this weekly show, Employment Law Today, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. on Tuesday evenings. I'm here again with Dr. Bruce Hurwitz from Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. And we've been talking a bit about, Bruce and I have been talking about the recruiting side of things, looking at red flags and looking at patterns and trends. And what's come across to me is, interesting enough, is that while a lot of things may have changed in the pandemic, some of the basics, what I'm hearing, almost stay the same in terms of traits people have and how they manifest those traits in terms of responsiveness to outside stressors or preparation or preparation for an interview, which I think can be some very good news for companies out there that might be wondering if it's a complete game changer when they're interviewing. And I also heard Bruce talk about some changes, of course, that, for example, questions about whether an employee or rather a candidate is willing to go into the field if they're an employee, something that may not have been such a hot topic on the radar in recruiting, say, a mere 10 months ago. So with that note, I'd like to address those.
Eric, may I interrupt you just for a moment, please?
Oh, please, yes.
Because there's another red flag that I thought of because what happened during the break.
Okay.
This is live, and an interview is also done live. Some are recorded, some are not. And things go wrong. You get tongue-tied. I mispronounce your name. You mispronounce the name of my company. Right. Neither one of us started to sweat. Right. We're listening to the commercials, and all of a sudden we both hear your voice, and we have the same sort of facial reaction. You didn't go apoplectic. I'm paying money to advertise. I'm not paying money to advertise on my own show. You made a mistake. It's not, no one died.
Sure.
It's real life. You get tongue-tied. If the person starts obsessing over it, that's a red flag. I apologize for interrupting.
No, that's okay. Actually, it's a welcome interruption. I think it's a very good point to make. You know, one thing I found doing this show is that if something goes a little awry, it's just again a sign of our humanity. You know, that we're human, we're imperfect, and I think you're absolutely right. You know, to be able to acknowledge something and keep it moving, whether it's a mute button that isn't working, or I think last week a little bit of a microphone issue, which I think thankfully has been abated and not been a problem tonight. so far, knock wood. So thank you, Bruce, for that observation. And so with that, why don't we keep that tone going, that sort of reassuring tone, if we will, and can you speak to any of the potential candidates out there listening this evening to this show? What kind of advice might you give? What kind of hopeful message, maybe, if any, to those that are looking for work during this pandemic?
I had originally 10 things I wanted to share. Now I have 11 because you gave me, you said something that reminded me. So I'm going to go through, if I may, all of them quickly, and then you can decide what you want me to focus on.
Sure.
The first is when I would call candidates to set up interviews, I can't do it during work. Now that's not a problem. They're at home. They may be working, but they're working virtually, so they can take the call and they can turn off their computer or turn off Zoom for their employer and have a Zoom session with me and a Zoom interview with me. So that's one new thing that's to the benefit of the candidate. The second thing is everybody's unemployed. It's not your fault, not going to be held against you. You don't have to worry about it. You got laid off. You weren't fired. Next, a lot of people lack confidence. I get a lot of career counseling clients who come to me, even especially, ironically, senior level people who say their problem is they lack confidence going into an interview. Well, you can practice, and now you can practice with a friend and have the friend ask questions. And that way, the more you rehearse, the better you become, the more confidence you have. Now, one of the things that we can't do anymore is to shake hands. And the handshake was always very important. It's the first tactile contact you have. If you give someone a firm handshake, it sends the message of confidence. If you give them the dead fish handshake, exact opposite. Or the one I really dislike is the fingertip handshake. All right? October 2019, you could say, I'm a germaphobe. I don't like shaking hands. And for me, that's fine. Or I'm religious and I don't shake hands. That's fine. No problem. But if you're going to shake hands, shake hands. Now you can't shake hands, but you can in a different way. You make sure you're one of the first on the Zoom call. You arrive early. Now, it doesn't matter, real life or Zoom, you got to show up. From my perspective, though, it's a lot better when somebody stands me up and I'm in my office than when somebody stands me up and I've gone all the way into Manhattan to meet with them.
Sure.
So it's aggravating, but it's a lot less aggravating. The background. We both have real backgrounds. These are real books. That's a real wall. If you have a virtual background, it could be sending the signal that you're that you're hiding something. Next are your mannerisms. Everything is magnified. So you've got to be careful what you're doing with your hands because it's not the same in real life. We spoke about your phone voice. You're now the receptionist. It's the same thing on the call. What do you wear? Now, I've had people come on with a tie. Women are always dressed professionally. Sometimes a guy will put on a tie and a jacket, and I say, I know you're at home. Thank you for the effort. Make yourself comfortable. All right? Then it also goes to confidence. You're on your home turf. You're not in the employer's conference room. So that should make you a little bit more relaxed. What we talked about earlier. What are your children, your spouse doing? And does that speak to respect or lack of respect, control, lack of control? And finally, I've actually had a couple of career counseling clients who believed they were discriminated against because they were too attractive.
Interesting.
And now it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter how good looking you are. And it's always been, I'm sure it must happen to men, but it's all, for my case, it's always happened with women. They're a flame, and the moths are always finding excuses to come around. And some bosses know how to handle it, and some don't. And some women know how to handle it, and some don't. That's no longer a reality.
And Bruce,
so those are my 11 points.
Excellent points to make. We have about a minute to end, so I want to just give you a chance to, I'd like to share my screen, and let's see if I get this correct here, the right screen. I want to share your contact information with our audience. I also want to take time to thank you so much for appearing tonight. Those 11 points really, I think, were very spot on. I think those are great takeaways for candidates, and if we had another half an hour, I would definitely get into a couple of those with you to further flesh them out and talk about them. But I think it's just to leave off on that note with those helpful resources, those tips, which again are not legal advice, but our tips are really helpful. So I want to thank you, Bruce, for appearing on a show. And what I'd like to do is like to share my screen. Can you all see my screen right now? Does anybody see Hurwitz?
Yep.
Bruce A. Hurwitz, PhD?
Yep.
Okay, so good. I did this correctly. Okay, great. Phew, sigh of relief there. So for those watching and listening tonight, you can find us live on talkradio.nyc's Facebook page, or you can find us on the website, www.talkradio.nyc. Tune in weekly, Tuesday nights, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Once again, I was here tonight joined by my guest, Bruce A. Hurwitz, and here's his information if you want to contact him. President, Hurwitz Strategic Staffing, his email address and phone, and that will be part of the files now, recorded, so people can see it. Let me stop the screen share so I can just look Bruce in the eye, and by that I mean look into the camera and say, Bruce, a pleasure once again. Thank you as always, a pleasure. Thanks
I thank you you're most welcome, and I thank you. This has been my pleasure. And I wish you the best of luck with the podcast.
Thank you. All right, and so we're going to be taking a break right now, wrapping up. Tune in next week at 5 p.m. to Employment Law Today on talkradio.nyc. Once again, I'm Eric Sauver, business law and employment law attorney at the law office Eric M. Sauver. If you have business law, employment law issues, I'm happy to help you.
You're listening